and it is my pleasure to welcome Shloime Zionce. Zionce, is that how I pronounce it?
We say a Zionce, but you're free
Zionce.
to use whatever pronunciation you like.
Okay, so Shloime Zionce. I think I've said it many different ways over the last month or so. And, for those of you who don't know, I have Beth Israel has a YouTube channel in which we have over 250, I think 300 followers. And I do a weekly, usually Rabbi Stein and I, we do a weekly 5 minutes of Torah, in which, we consider it a pretty good day when we get 125 views. And so I think that's pretty impressive, 125 views. And also Shloime has a YouTube channel, and he gets, I think, a little more than 100, even more than 125,000 views, right?
Sometimes.
So I actually, Avishai first made me aware of Shloime's videos and traveling in the Middle East. And Shloime's our next session, he's going to be talking about his travels in the Middle East and travels around the world. But today, one of the things that I discovered with Shloime is he actually has this wonderful series going around with a friend of his who also does videos who actually does videos of all kinds of communities in New York City. And he and Shloime have teamed up to do Jewish Hasidic New York. And it really caught my eye, and I fell in love with it. And I watched a number of Shloime's videos and an interview with him, and I was just taken by the fact that I really saw him as a wonderful bridge between the Jewish world. I'm going to ask you a number of questions in a few minutes, but one of the things that you said in the interview, you were talking to someone who's not Jewish, and you said, you have to understand, Jews are, there's a whole debate, are we a race, or we did it? And you said to him the thing that I love the most. You said to this person, you have to understand, Jews are a family. And so we might not necessarily look exactly the same. We might not sound the same. We might have different even theological perspectives, but we're all a family. And I loved when you said that. And I was really taken by that. And I think it's such an opportunity for us to learn from a member of our family from whom we don't necessarily often get to learn. So before, talking about family, we have our own specific, really immediate family, and we have a bigger family. And so I want to just narrow in for a few moments on who are you, and tell us about your family. Not the Jewish people. Don't tell us about the entire Jewish people, but if you could just tell us, Shloime, about you for a minute.
Sure. So actually, just before I get into that, I wanted to mention that right now on social media, on Twitter, there's this big debate going on whether Jews are a religion or they're a family. And I was actually just like rethinking what I said to Peter Santanello, that guy who the interview you watched with. And I'm wondering if I would have phrased that differently. I don't think I would, but we're also a religion, but we're definitely a family. So I might have focused too much on the family part, but yeah, let's get into it. So my name is Shloime Zionce. I'm 28 years old, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a family, a Hasidic family. At the age of 3, we moved to Toronto, Canada, where my father got a job as a rabbi in a funeral home. And he had that job for a while. He ended up leaving that job, starting a local Jewish magazine, and eventually going into real estate, which is what he does now. I had a pretty normal Hasidic childhood, which means growing up without internet or TV, going to Hasidic school, which was obviously just with boys my age. My sister went to a girls' school, Hasidic school, and I have 3 siblings. So I'm the oldest, and then there's a younger brother, a sister, and another younger brother. I had some trouble as a child, well, not in my early childhood, but when I became like 10 or 11 years old, I started learning Talmud, Gemara. And for me, that was very difficult. I'm not sure why, but as soon as they started studying Talmud, I just could not find myself concentrating in class. For some reason, it wasn't working for me. Later, I would discover that I had an abstract learning disability, which is why as soon as they started learning complicated subjects, which is what most of the Talmud is, I immediately tuned out. So I would just spend my time causing trouble at school and thinking and dreaming about my future once I, please God, would get out of school. And I don't know why, but something about the world of travel really talked to me. And I just told myself that one day I'm going to go out there and like visit every country in the world or go as far as I can. When I was 15 years old, my parents sent me to study at a yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey, which supposedly was going to help me because I didn't really fit into the yeshiva I was at in Canada. So I went there, spent almost 2 years there, and got kicked out at the age of 17 for having a cell phone. That was against the rules. And I mean, trust me, I made life very difficult for the rabbis and the administration, and I didn't want to be there. They didn't want me there. So eventually there was a straw that broke the camel's back and I was thrown out. I spent a year, what they call on the street. That means that I was doing odd jobs and I wasn't in yeshiva like most of my peers were. I actually got a job working as a security guard at a local electronics store in Brooklyn. Basically, one morning I woke up and I woke up to a phone call from a friend who said that his grandfather was opening an electronics store and they needed a security guard. And I was like, why in the world is he calling me? I don't know anything about security. And the guy basically told me, we're going to give you a vest and a buzzer. You stand at the window, and if anybody looks frightening, you don't let them in. If they look okay, then you buzz them in. That's what the job entails. They offered me $10 an hour and I took it. I stood there for 2 weeks like that, just buzzing people in, buzzing people out. And eventually the owner of the store realized that he didn't need security. His real problem was getting people in the door, and no one was coming to the store. So they put me out in front of the store with a big pile of flyers. And from now on, my entire existence was just standing on the corner of 86th Street and 5th Avenue in Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, and handing out flyers to whoever passed by. And one thing I noticed very quickly is that nobody takes flyers. And when your entire job is dependent on that, it really makes you feel like a loser because you're literally standing out there trying to hand them out to people. No one wants to take them. Now, I'm sharing this with you for a very important reason. It's because after a couple of days of standing there on the street, on the corner, I realized something profound that literally changed my life. Basically, what would happen is if I handed out a flyer and there were 10 people walking past me on the street, if I would hand one to the first person would take it, the next 10 people would take the flyer. If the first person did not take it, the 10 people after that would not take the flyer. And what I realized was that most human beings, or many human beings, are taking actions in their own lives based on what they see other people doing. And I realized that I never wanted to live that kind of life. I wouldn't want to reach the end of my life and realize that I lived a life where I was taking actions based on the actions of other people. I wanted to do what I want to do. And that is when I made a decision that no matter what I did in life, it would be what I really, really internally want to do. And eventually, after a couple of weeks of doing that, I was pretty much miserable. My father made me an offer. He asked me to go back to yeshiva. I was not interested. Although I wasn't having a great time, it was better than being in yeshiva. So he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He said, I will fly you anywhere in the world. All you got to do is go to yeshiva in Israel for 10 days. If you don't like the yeshiva, you have a paid ticket to wherever you want to go. And I said, okay, this is great. I'll have to suffer in yeshiva for 10 days. Big deal. I've never been to Israel before anyway. So I'll just try to get out as much as possible during those 10 days. And then I'll go to Dubai and Saudi Arabia and who knows where else. I went to the yeshiva. I tried it out for 10 days, ended up staying for 3 years. There was something different about this yeshiva where they had karate classes, they had a woodworking workshop, they had a music studio and music lessons and music teachers, and they also learned the Talmud. But that's where I found my place in Judaism, meaning I'm not the kind of person who can sit and pray and study all day. I need to get out there. I need to have fun. I need to enjoy this world too. I know the next world's going to be great, but what about this world? So that's what I did. I stayed there for 3 years, ended up getting married, and we currently live in Israel. I have 2 children, and I'm living my dream because I get to travel the world, and I've gone to some of the craziest places. Rabbi, please stop me from talking again.
Can you tell us about your immediate family, your children, and
Sure. So I have a beautiful, amazing wife. She's a very talented artist, and she also loves to travel. So we do get to go out as often as, we try to go out as often as possible to travel with her. We've been to some interesting places together. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. They both turned 6 and 2 in the past month. So we're a small family, but we're a young family. I just turned 28 years old. So I had my first child a little before I turned 22.
Is that common in your circles?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have friends who were fathers by the age of 18.
Married, of course.
Yes, married, of course. Very important to mention that.
Well, that's a great background in how you got to where you are. Would you mind what do you do professionally? No.
Well, I don't do anything professionally. I just live. I'm just trying to find a way to get through life without going broke and getting evicted. That's my goal. While I was in school, in elementary school, I believe it was 6th grade, I had a teacher named Mr. Payat, very, very kind man. And he gave us a creative writing assignment. And I don't remember what I wrote, but I remember that when I handed it in, he took a look at it and he told me, at the end of the day, he came over to me and said, Shloime, I want you to know that you wrote very, very well. And I don't care if you fail math, science, or everything else. As long as you keep writing, you passed in my book. And I just went on, did not write more, failed math, failed science. But he gave me the confidence that I was a good writer. And later, after I got married, when I was looking for something to do, and we tried a couple different things, I started a novelty sock brand a couple of months after we got married. We actually had a lot of interest, and we had some interesting sock designs. I went to North Carolina, had it manufactured. It was a small investment of a couple $1,000s, but basically because we were living in Israel, it was very difficult to find, to get the socks distributed. My main avenue of sales was online, and it was hard to get traffic. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to bring traffic to my website. So we basically stopped selling the socks, and I was looking for something else to do. And I bumped into a friend of mine who was a writer, and I figured perhaps I could try my hand at writing because this teacher had told me that I'd be good at writing. So, 5 years later, I pretty much can say that most of the money I make, I guess, is made through writing, although the video content now and other things are slowly taking that over.
What you write for a magazine that most of us really aren't familiar with.
Sure. So I write for a magazine called Ami Magazine. It's a Hasidic, it's owned by Hasidic people. The idea is that they want to try to unite all of Am Yisrael, all the Jewish people, which is why it's called Ami, my nation. And I am their foreign correspondent. So basically, when they hired me, it was just to write local stories in Israel. The first story I wrote was about a woman named Margalit Zinati. She's an 84-year-old woman living in a town in Israel, northern Israel, called Pekian. And in this town, her family has been living continuously in this town for 2,000 years since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And she is the last descendant of this family, and she's living completely alone in a family full of Druze people. So I went to see her, and basically what happened was I took my wife on a vacation to Thailand, and when we were in the airport in Tel Aviv, my editor called and asked when a certain story I was doing was going to be ready, and I said, oh, I'm going away for 10 days. So she said, where are you going? I said, Thailand. She said, why don't you write about it when you come back? So I got back, wrote about it. People loved the article, and they started writing letters into the magazine, asking them to send me on more trips. And that's what turned into my full-time job.
By the way, I should tell you that I have been lost in Peking. Many years ago, when data was very expensive, I was trying to save my data, didn't turn my ways on, made a right-hand turn off of a road, and found myself in Peking. And if you've ever been to Peking, it looks like you're in the old city of Jerusalem, but you can drive it easily and not easily. And I was lost with my car in the old city, and it was terrible. I actually said a couple words. Our sons at that point, Yair and Avishai, said, "Abba, you're not allowed to say those words." It wasn't good. But
the locals were probably very nice to you, were they not?
They were very nice to me, absolutely. Yeah. But it was,
it's fascinating because they're like, I don't know everything about the Druze, but like in my mind, I see them as kind of similar to Arabs, and some of them are Muslim, whatever. It's fascinating that like you have these people who are really nice. Yeah.
I actually almost drove into one of their houses and they tried inviting me in for tea. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to get home. So,
Wow.
can you, so you write for a magazine out of New York, a Hasidic magazine out of New York that tries to bring the Jewish people together. And you say foreign correspondence, is it mostly travel writing, or is it, and they're not sending you to the border in right now between Russia and Ukraine, right?
Well, actually, less than a week ago, I was in Russia, not to cover the war. I went for a different reason, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I have been to some war zones, not specifically because I was looking for the action, it's just because I ended up there. If there's like a war that's going on, I might, and I'm coming through that country, that might just happen. Last week, actually, I went to Russia to do a sleepover at a Holocaust survivor's house. Basically, I was in Russia a couple months ago, and I was with this Chabad rabbi who was what he does all day basically is he feeds these old people who have whose spouses have passed away. They have no children, they have no brothers and sisters, and they have no way to support themselves. So he sends them food 3 times a day. And we went to drop off a food package at this old man's house, and he said, I want your guest to stay by me next time he comes. So I promised him that I would do that. And then I realized that, I mean, he's a really old person. I don't know how much time we have left. So last week I flew back, I stayed at his house. He only speaks Russian. I don't speak any Russian. Well, I only know the bad words. And it was the weirdest thing because he gave me this room in his house, and he kept, like, all night, he just kept barging into my room and talking to me in Russian. And I have no idea what he was saying, but clearly he needed the company so badly that he was just willing to spill his heart out in Russian. So I was there for it. It was a very nice experience, and there's a video about it. It'll be coming to my YouTube channel soon.
You mentioned Chabad, and for us in Vancouver, really the only connection that we have here in the city to anyone who's a Hasid is Chabad. What is Hasidism, and how does Chabad connect? And are you a Chabadnik?
So on a personal level, I don't know if I can call myself a Chabadnik, but I have taken on, I wasn't always like this, but at this point, I want to be connected to all of Am Yisrael. I want to be connected to everybody. And I'm done putting labels on myself. I could say I'm Hasidic, but I don't associate with any specific group anymore. I like to take the best from everyone. That's the way I see it. So that's my personal stance. Now, the Hasidic world is very, very diverse. There are, I'd say, over 200 groups. And every one of them has, or most of them have Sfarim. They have books written by great rabbis who sort of laid out the ideas that are focused on in that specific Hasidic group. So Chabad is very focused on the mind and the different sections of the mind, Chachma, Bina, Das, which are different spheres. These are lofty concepts that I don't necessarily understand in full. But they're also very focused on taking action, trying to reach as many Jews as possible. And that's something that I really connect to. I'm not that much of a deep thinker. I just like to take action. And I find that when I meet with other people and see things that I'm not used to and get into that kind of world, that's when the deep thoughts come. That's after experiencing like physical experiences that I could share with anyone later at night. That's when it takes me to good places in my head.
And there are different, you said there are hundreds, literally hundreds of Hasidic groups.
Yeah.
And what, can you describe where those Hasidic groups are found in North America?
Sure. So in North America, I'd say an overwhelmingly large proportion of them are in New York State, specifically New York City and Brooklyn. You have also a lot of people in upstate New York, in the Rockland, Muncie area. You have a lot of people in New Jersey, in Lakewood, and in other places in New Jersey. You have in upstate New York, and there's a all Hasidic town called Kiryas Joel from Satmar, or they actually became legally their own town. They call it Palm Tree because the Rebbe's last name is Teitelbaum, and Teitelbaum in Yiddish means a palm tree. So they named the town Palm Tree, New York. you have some Hasidim in Chicago, you have some in LA, you have some in Cleveland, then you have some in Canada, on a much less in Canada, but they also exist there. Montreal has a decent sizable Hasidic community. Toronto has some, and that's pretty much it for North America.
And what's the relationship between the Hasid? First of all, what's the relationship between the individual Hasidic groups, and how do they differ from each other? Like, how would Chabad differ from Satmar? Or you told me that you grew up going to the yeshiva that you were dismissed from for a cell phone was the same flavor yeshiva that my father grew up going to, a Babav Hasidic yeshiva. So
Actually, I went to Bobovitz as elementary school. The high school that I was kicked out of was not even Hasidic, actually.
What's the difference though between Babav and Satmar and Chabad?
We could go into that a little bit, but I believe the next, or there's going to be one session, maybe the third session is going to be all about that, all about the inner politics and stuff. But just on a very basic level, I mean, there are differences on outer appearance, the way they dress, the way we dress, I should say. And then you have ideological differences, there are political differences. So there are two Hasidic groups specifically, and we'll get into this on a much deeper level in the next session. There are two Hasidic groups that are considered like the outcast groups. That is Chabad and Breslov, because there are factions and teachings there that can be considered extreme to other Hasidim. So they're like, I remember growing up, we were told like, kind of like, stay safe from Chabad and Breslov, don't get too close, because they're not like our kind. But as I got older, I realized that like, no, I literally want to be connected with all of them, because I don't believe in that concept that like they're not our thing. I'm trying to bring everyone together. So in like, for example, Chabad is very, very open. They will purchase their own TV channel to broadcast the Rebbe of Lubavitch's teachings all over the world. And they are pro-internet use to share Judaism and to use technology in a good way. Whereas in Satmar, they believe that it's all about preserving the sanctity of the group as opposed to sharing and spreading the teachings with the world, which I can understand both ways, because you have people in Chabad who sometimes will like, there are these concerns about technologies that when you're opening up too much, you end up losing the sanctity of what you're trying to preserve, because you're getting connected to the internet, which is such a great, powerful tool that you can sometimes bring in negative influences. So I understand both sides of the coin, but I tend to stick to the side where, we live in the 21st century and we have to use the tools that God gave us to make this world greater.
It's interesting. I think that, as you say, that in the Hasidic world itself, they sort of consider Chabad and Bratslav to be those kitzonim, those extremes, and yet from our meaning non-Hasidic perspective, they're really the only Hasidic groups that we ever have any interaction with.
Right, and it's also interesting because I have so many friends in Chabad. At this point, I'm very close to Chabad, just because when you travel to places where you don't get kosher restaurants, you end up in a Chabad house like every week. So I have hundreds of friends in Chabad, and if I would tell them that like in my upbringing they were considered extreme, some of them might be offended. But I believe the communication is good. Like I will share with them the things that I understood as a child and why I think differently now, and vice versa. So yeah, they definitely are considered extreme. And it's funny because to most people who are not part of the Hasidic world, you see someone in a black suit and white shirt and a hat, and you're like, they're all the same. But in the Hasidic world, they're like, no, we're not the same. And we're so different from them.
Is that the perspective in the Hasidic world of non-Hasidic Jews, that we're all the same?
No, because it's different, because you have, even in the non-Hasidic world, you have so many different factions. But I'm talking about specifically the way Hasidim are perceived. And again, I've never been not Hasidish, but I've traveled all over the world and met with all sorts of people. And people generally tend to think that if you dress a certain way, you are a certain way. So anybody who dresses on the Hasidic spectrum, to an outsider, can look like the Hasidim are all the same.
what role does Yiddish play what role did Yiddish play growing up, and what role does Yiddish play in Hasidic New York?
Oh, that's a great question. And I honestly, we could probably do 5 sessions just on the Yiddish language alone, because wow. So first of all, Yiddish is the language that most Hasidic groups speak, definitely in a public setting. So when you go to synagogue or school or events, it's all Yiddish, except for in Chabad, where they're more English based, because Chabad does a lot of outreach. So if you're bringing in new people and they don't speak Yiddish, it would be speaking Yiddish would not be smart. So even though the Rebbe of Chabad liked Yiddish and he wanted Yiddish to be taught in Chabad schools, any place where there's going to be people who are not part of Chabad who wouldn't understand Yiddish, Chabad just drops the whole Yiddish thing and they speak the local language, whether it be English, Russian, French, etc. But in what we'll call the regular Hasidic world, Yiddish is the language that is spoken. I grew up, Yiddish was my first language. We spoke it in the house until I was 5. I'm not sure what happened when I turned 5, but we just stopped, I guess. But I studied in school. Yiddish is the glue that kind of keeps people together. It unites people in a way, like you're part of this Yiddish speaking club in the middle of New York City. There are entire areas that most of the population, the language they speak best is Yiddish. You have, this is probably not smart and not safe, but this is the reality. If you walk into Brooklyn and you speak Yiddish in the Hasidic area, people trust you. If you don't speak Yiddish, it's harder for them to trust you. So you can have, if there was a non-Jewish person who learned Yiddish and walked into the area, they could get access to whatever they wanted just because people see them as one of the kind, even if they're not Jewish. Like there's actually this African-American YouTuber who reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. He studies languages and he taught himself Yiddish, like really good, fluent Hasidic Yiddish. And next week I'm flying to New York and we're going to be doing YouTube videos together. A Hasidic man and a black man walking the streets speaking Yiddish. It's going to be a lot of fun. Rabbi, you're muted.
I've been saying that for 2 years. You're muted, please. So thank you. What about the non-Orthodox Jewish community? Not even non-Hasidic, but in the non-Orthodox Jewish community and use of Yiddish. What's your perspective on that?
So I think the use of Yiddish is a beautiful thing, no matter where it happens. Some people consider it a dying language, which is factually incorrect, because any language that is being spoken by a first generation of children, by a generation of children as their first language, shouldn't, according to history, die out. I was recently doing an interview with a YouTuber who came to Brooklyn, and he called Yiddish a dying language. And I said, look around, there are 100,000 children who've been born in the last 20 years speaking this language. This language is not dying anytime soon. But the fact that you have people who are not Hasidic, or sometimes not religious, sometimes not even Jewish, who speak Yiddish. There's the whole Yiddishist movement. There's Yiddish art, Yiddish theater, Yiddish poetry, Yiddish literature. I think that's a wonderful thing. And any time where you have people from different backgrounds studying the same language, that's a great tool for people to be able to connect and learn about each other, and hopefully make meaningful relationships that can help impact the world in a positive way.
I want to shift gears a little bit. When you were on one of the videos I saw with you and Peter Santinelli, you mentioned the fact that the Shoah still has a deep impact on the Hasidic community today. Can you talk about that a little bit, please? Sure.
So Brooklyn, New York, and again, I'm not sure if this is factually true. Meaning, when I had a pre-interview with the rabbi, I was talking about a specific neighborhood, and I called it the most Jewish neighborhood in the United States. And the rabbi said, actually, it's a suburb of a certain city. That's the most Jewish neighborhood based on the population or whatever. So I don't know specifically about the exact details of this, but there's a massive concentration of survivors of concentration camps in Brooklyn, New York, in the Hasidic areas. You have Holocaust survivors, many of them on every block. And it's in a way, it's like a ghetto, right? Because you have all these Jews stuffed into one area. There's no grass, there's no trees. It's just concrete, smelly garbage and Jews. and they're all in there. And the Hasidic world is definitely somewhat secluded, insular, and we generally stick to ourselves. There's number one, there's this Jewish idea of that we're God's chosen people, and we kind of like stick to each other because we're a family. But also, when you've been persecuted for 2,000 years, you develop this callous, and you stop trusting your neighbors. And specifically, when something happened less than 80 years ago, or just about 80 years ago, and I know people whose neighbors turned them into the Nazis, etc. So they just developed a zero trust for anybody who's not a member of the family. And this has been passed on to the younger generation. Which is why I told you, anybody who doesn't speak Yiddish is like a little bit, I don't know how much that is today, but if a kid was walking down the street and someone walked up to the kid and started speaking in a language other than Yiddish, the kid would probably run away. Like, what does this person want from me? This person doesn't have good interests. And on another level, you have Holocaust survivors who went through a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of terrible things that we should never and could never understand. And there was no therapy when they got out of Auschwitz, whoever survived. They just went on. Many of them got married, started families, and some of them were children when they had lost their parents, so they never saw a functioning home. They were all abused, and then they just started families. No one was there to help them work through their troubles. So a lot of them, unfortunately, had trauma, had anger issues. A lot of them were abusive to their children. And I would say that we still are feeling the ramifications of this today. There are a lot of messed up families in Brooklyn because of the Holocaust, like direct consequences from Hitler to 2022.
Do people speak about this? Are there resources available?
You say resources. I'm not like, where do we start? Are we supposed to give therapy to the 80-year-old Holocaust survivors, or are we giving therapy to their children or to the grandchildren? I don't know. Like, this is a big topic. Honestly, it's a very good question, and I feel like it should be spoken about more. And I'm going to make a conscious decision to speak about this less so to the outside world, because I'm not sure anyone can help from outside, but inside the community, I really need to talk about this because. Yeah, we need to try to get over our traumas. There's this idea that I've grown up with in the Hasidic world, is that we have to like stay safe and preserve ourselves, not get too close to the outside, because we never want this to happen again. And I understand that. That's the way people who've been through trauma think. They just close up and don't want to open up. And I recently did CNN came to Brooklyn, CNN from Brazil, and they did an interview with me. We had a very interesting conversation, and they didn't end up putting this in the segment, but I told them, I said, I'm not trying to wipe away the Holocaust. God forbid. I'm not trying to wipe away the trauma of my grandparents and great-grandparents. Everything they went through was real. But I don't think it's healthy to continue living this way, where everybody who's not Hasidic Yiddish speaking is suspect. And I don't think it's healthy that we still believe that our neighbors are going to turn us in. And I think we need to open up and build relationships with our neighbors, so that hopefully we can prevent this from ever happening again. But I ended off with this. I said, with all my bridge building, and we'll get into this in the next episode, I've been all over the Arab world. I've met with literally former ISIS fighters, billionaires in Dubai, government ministers in the Arab world. I've met with fascinating people, and they're all my friends, and it's all great. But I told the guy from CNN, at the end of the day, I have this Holocaust trauma in me. It's been passed down to me. And I can be your friend. I will eat with you. I'll sit in your house. We can go on trips together, whatever you want. But you can never, ever remove that fear and trauma from me. And as hard as I'm going to try to get over it, in the back of my mind, I'm always going to be looking behind my back and making sure that I'm safe. And that's not a bad thing, because time and time again, the Jewish people have been thrown out of countries that welcomed them, and they've been persecuted and killed and raped and burned at the stake. So I'm trying to get over all that trauma, and I'm trying to be an open person, as open as I can be in the 21st century. But at the same time, I'm always going to look behind me, and I believe that the Jewish people need to figure out ways to protect themselves, fight anti-Semitism. Let's be open. We have this concept in the Torah called kabdeu v'chashdeu, that means honor him and suspect him. I can be your friend or whatever, but unfortunately, if you're not a member of my family, I cannot give you 100% of my trust. You can have 99.9, but you can't have all of it, because history does not allow me to do that.
That raises a very interesting question, and I want to ask. By the way, of course, the trauma of the Holocaust, I think, is particularly impactful in the Hasidic community proportionally, but of course, the entire Jewish world felt it.
Yeah, for sure.
And including as the child of a someone who grew up in a Reform family and a Hasidic family, both Holocaust survivors, thus becoming a conservative Jew, finding the middle ground. It's in my family as well. So, but I wanted to ask about the very nature of Hasidic life is to put up boundaries and to create boundaries between us and the rest of the world. Do you think that's helpful for Hasidic Judaism? Do you think that's helpful for the Jewish people by putting up those boundaries and even our interpretation of halakha, our interpretation of Jewish law?
So just before we get to that, I just want to add one more thing. You mentioned that all Jewish people, have this trauma of the Holocaust, which is true. The only thing I would add is that in the Hasidic world specifically, when the more outwardly, openly Jewish you dress, so that means hats, the long suits, the beards, the payas, the more you are likely to be targeted for anti-Semitism, which is why in Brooklyn, that's like a real big trauma. So, but getting back to your other question about the boundaries, to be honest, I'm not sure if that's one of the pillars of Hasidic thought. It's in my opinion, that started more or less after the Holocaust, when people were really burned from their neighbors and anybody who wasn't family, and they started they put a serious emphasis on separating themselves from the rest of the world. I wasn't there before the Holocaust. I don't know if it was like that, but the feeling I get is that a lot of these unwritten rules came around after the Shoah. Yeah.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, in Brooklyn today, there have been a number of anti-Semitic incidents where Jews are just simply being punched and injured simply, by people randomly. And in fact,
almost every day.
Yeah, the only place in North America where I feel at this point in my life where I feel concerned about wearing a kippah openly, ironically and sadly, is on the streets in Brooklyn, because we went to go visit my cousin this past summer, my son Yair and I said, you know what? Now that we've left Manhattan and we're in Brooklyn, please put your baseball hat on. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Who would ever imagine that I would wear a baseball hat dafka precisely in Brooklyn and not in Manhattan and not anywhere else in the world or anywhere else in North America? So it's a real issue. What can you describe? I want to just shift a little bit. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll ask questions that way. Can you describe the use of modern technology in the Hasidic world outside of, say, your house?
Or lack thereof.
Right, and why?
Okay, so again, it's pretty much the idea is that when you open the door, you have no idea what's going to come in. So there's this blanket rule pretty much that we try not to interact with technology too much. So you have, almost no Hasidic families have TVs. Like if a Hasidic family has a TV, that's a state secret. That's something that's in the parents' bedroom, or maybe the kids know about it, but they're told that if they ever tell anyone, they're going to get kicked out of school. Whenever TV was invented, maybe it was in the late 40s or 50s, the Hasidic rabbis got together and they said, this is something we're not going to allow in our community.
And there was even a funny story that that happened. There was the Bobov rabbi at that point, Shloime of Bobov. He was living in Brooklyn, and they were doing a fundraiser for the Bobov Yeshiva, and they were going to be doing a raffle. And there were a bunch of prizes, and the rabbis got together at the same time to work on the ban on TV. And one of the rabbis who was at this meeting got up and said, "Why are you banning TV? The Rebbe of Bobov has a TV in his own house." And the Rebbe said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And it turns out that when they went around to different stores asking them to donate prizes for this raffle to fundraise, one of the local electronics stores donated a massive TV, and it was in the Rebbe's house, like waiting to be given to the person who won, but they didn't even know what it looked like. So turns out, yeah, he did have a TV in his house, but they got rid of it as soon as they found out. So the rabbis banned the TV, and that's something that was very much adhered to. Like, most people took that one very seriously, and a TV in a Hasidic home is very rare. When it came to the internet, the rabbis were much slower to act, and even there were blanket bans, but the internet became something that it's impossible to live without. It's pretty much impossible to live without the internet in this day and age, and which is why there was a convention, not a convention, should I say? There's this massive event in MetLife Stadium, approximately 10 years ago, maybe it was 9 years ago, where the rabbis finally figured out a unified response of how to deal with the internet. And the basic motto of the convention, of this event, was the internet, we can't live with it, we can't live without it. What do we do? And that's when they came up with a unified system. So most Orthodox people, or should I say ultra-Orthodox, in the Haredi Hasidic world, in the Yeshiva world, they have filters on their devices. So I personally filter on my phone and on my computer, which means that my filter will not allow me to go to sites that are immodest. So there's going to be no pornography, generally no movies, a lot of people, and you can adjust the strictness of the filter, like according to your liking. So, some people will block YouTube. I don't block YouTube, but some people will block YouTube. Some people will only allow shopping. So you go to Amazon or food, Costco, whatever. But that really depends on the family. But that generally all Hasidic Jews have filters on their devices, which is there to help guide them to not waste their time or fall into destructive habits. You can talk about censorship and stuff like that. I'm not necessarily against it. These are people who generally really want to be good and want to stay in their own lane, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe if they went into a different lane for a little bit just to see what it's like and interact with other people, that might not be a bad thing either. But the idea is they're trying to focus on family and on the religion and what's important. And as we all know, with the internet, it's very, very easy to get distracted, and that's what they're trying to avoid.
So you're adjusting your own phone or computer, or is someone else doing that?
So the way I do it personally is that I have the password to my wife's filter, and she has mine. So if I wanted to block YouTube, I would need her help to do so, or vice versa. There's also a organization called TAG, which is it's called the Technology Awareness Group, and they pretty much have the monopoly on this. So they will install either a free filter or a paid filter, and they have tens of locations. They have a bunch in Brooklyn, a bunch in Lakewood, a bunch of Muncie. They have locations in Israel and in Europe. And they basically develop these filters that can be adjusted. And you can, a lot of people don't trust themselves. So you go into TAG's office when you get a new device, they put a filter on your phone. You tell them, I do want Instagram, I don't want YouTube, whatever specifically you want to do, and they will adjust it for you. They have the passwords. And anytime you need anything fixed, you go to them and they take care of it for you.
Can you actually tell us, how did you meet your wife?
Sure. So I did one of the more unconventional ways of meeting my wife. It was still a shidduch, as a prearranged meeting, but we went out on our own, as opposed to something that is very common in the Hasidic world. It's called a basho, where basically a boy and girl will meet in, let's say, the girl's house in their dining room for a couple of minutes and talk to each other. And then if it goes well, they might do it again once or twice, and then they'll get engaged. These things happen very quickly. I know people literally who gotten engaged to their wives after meeting for 20 minutes once. I'm sorry?
What's the divorce rates amongst the?
I don't know the exact rates, and it's going to be hard for anyone to know those rates because divorce is something that is frowned upon, which might not be a good thing, because if someone's in an unhealthy relationship, they should probably get out. But in general, in the Orthodox Jewish world, the idea is that they'll try to do anything to make it work and stay together. Usually there's children involved, so it's not just two people splitting up. There's a family now, and how's that going to affect them? So people will definitely try to stave off divorce for as long as possible. But back to me meeting my wife. I mean, we dated for 2 weeks.
And do you find that a lot of your friends who are brought together by shidduchim have healthy relationships, or do you see some unhealthy relationships there?
I'm thinking. It's funny. I never really thought about my friends and that question. I'd say the majority of them do have healthy relationships. I definitely know some people who are in toxic relationships, and I wouldn't necessarily pin that on the way they met, although it could be a problem for some of them. This trauma from the Holocaust is a big one. A lot of people have anger issues. People can be abusive. I mean, it's a crazy world out there, and there's a lot of raw trauma that's never been dealt with.
What do people talk about in the Hasidic world, the non-Orthodox community? I mean, what's the perception of the non-Orthodox community?
Oh, wow, spicy question. So, wow, okay, let's unpack this. I've never heard I never heard this as being taught, or let's sit down and talk about the non-Orthodox community, but the things have come up in in conversations and sentiment that you can pick up from the way people act. So it really depends on who you're talking to. As I said, the Hasidic world is very diverse, very vast, even though we may look the same, but there are many different schools of thought. So in Chabad, for example, they're very, very, very open to everything. So like in Chabad, it's all about sharing what we have, learning from other people. In other Hasidic groups, they're much more insular. And let's not even get into the non-Orthodox world. In certain Hasidic groups, if you're not a member of that group, you're like a little bit suspect, and they might think that you're not doing the right thing. And this is something that happens when groups are closely together all the time, the same people for years on end. You sort of lose your healthy way of interacting with people who are different than you, and the ability to see people who are different than you in just an open and fair way. So I've never seen organized discussion about this, but every family is different based on, and every group is different based on how open they are or what they believe. I couldn't answer that question specifically because I've never seen organized discussion about it. But there definitely are places where there's negative perception of the non-Orthodox world. There are definitely places where they're more open to it.
One person wants to know about your own children. What kind of education are you giving them and plan to give them in Israel? And that of course, some of us may not know about the broader spectrum of Jewish education in Israel, but.
Sure. So first of all, I don't think I'm going to be living in Israel forever. We tried, but it's difficult for someone who's an English speaker to adjust. We never really found our specific place. I mean, thank God we have friends, we have some family, we know people, we get along fine, but I feel like it's much easier and could be more enjoyable for us to move back to the United States or Canada, where we'd be with people who had similar upbringing to us. So I imagine that's going to happen soon. Therefore, the education in Israel is not something we know much about, or very interested in. We're more looking at what the options will be when we get back to North America. Our children at the moment are in a school that is not Hasidic. Just well, because there is no Hasidic school in my area, and even if there was, if their vision didn't align with mine, then I wouldn't send them there. For me, what's most important to me is not so much that they should have a Hasidic education. I want my children to see every Jew as a member of the family, regardless of their background. And I'm going to send them to a school that imparts that message. So if it's a Hasidic school, that's great. If it's not, that's great too. But I just can't see myself putting my kids in a school where they're going to see people as different. We need to unite, not divide. Not that these schools are specifically divided, or dividing, but that's the main thing that I want them to have in their education, is an openness to learning about their traditions, while also learning about people who are different.
I wanted to, there's a couple, one person, this is a simple answer. What language do you speak at home?
We speak English, and my parents and my in-laws both often remind us that we should probably teach our children Yiddish as well, which is something I 100% agree with. It's just hard to put into practice because everything else I do pretty much is in English. I even talk to my Hasidic friends in English. It's just easier for me.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about secular education in the Hasidic world?
Sure. So secular education in the Hasidic world, that's a very hot topic. You have every Hasidic group deals with this differently. I went to the Babav Cheder, which is the Babav group. They are considered to be more open than most other Hasidic groups. And I would say I got a decent secular education. We learned math, we learned science, a little bit of biology. We learned a lot of history. There definitely was a lot of history, and I get by. I don't have any degrees. I never went to college or for higher education, but I'm able to support my family based on the education I got. There also is this movement of people who say that the Hasidic, and people from within the Hasidic community, by the way, that the Hasidic education can be inadequate, specifically when kids get out of school and they need to support themselves. It's might be harder for them to adjust and adapt into the business world because they might not have enough skills. I hear the argument, but to be honest, in one of the most, shall we say, extreme Hasidic groups, Satmar, where literally, I know people who can't spell their own name in English. And some of these people make millions of dollars a year because Jews always find a way to make it work. My grandfather told me that he once bought me a violin. Unfortunately, I never learned how to play it. But he said a violin is a Jewish instrument. And I said, why? He said, because when they kick you out of your country, you can't take a piano on your back. But a violin comes with you wherever you go. And that's just an idea that Jews just adapt, Jews figure it out. So I'm not sure the education specifically hinders people or prevents them from making a livelihood. I believe anybody who wants to succeed can do so. Yeah, maybe the Hasidic groups can do a little bit of a better job with education, but at the end of the day, anybody who wants to make it usually will make it.
What's the dropout rate in the Hasidic community? Do you know?
Like people leaving the community?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know. And once again, this is like the divorce statistic. It would be hard to get because, first of all, most people do stay. Like the vast majority of people who stay within the community, especially today, the community has become so vast. You have families who the father will be like, never saw TV in his life, never used the internet in his life, has this huge long beard, long pants, wears his hat all day, wears his suit all day, even at home, he wears hat and his suit, never take it off. And then you have the Hasidic kid who wears t-shirts, trims his beard, has an unfiltered smartphone in his pocket, and they're living in the same house. So, it used to be that if you were part of one family, you're probably just all doing the same thing. Today, there are these modern Hasidic groups. And I don't mean specific Hasidic groups that have a Rebbe and the Rebbe decided to be modern, but within the group, there's the counterculture and the younger people who are much more modernized, and they'll stay within that group and hang out with their more modern friends at the synagogue. And so it's rare that people leave, but it definitely does happen. There probably are some statistics about it, but I wouldn't trust any of them as being super accurate, just because it's very hard to get these numbers. Like, I don't know who specifically is taking notes, and I'm sure there's some organization doing it, but I certainly don't have the numbers.
There's a question here about Hasidic. I'm not going to read it in its entirety, but someone whose mother was not Jewish, actually came from the Philippines, and father was a Holocaust survivor, and she converted, and then he was raised in a Jewish family, going to Jewish camp, going to Jewish schools. And so the question is, would the Hasidic community consider him to be Jewish? And that then opens up another question. We have 30 seconds. No, what's the Hasidic approach to conversion, specifically Hasidic conversion or conversion in general?
So I don't know that there's a difference between a Hasidic conversion, non-Hasidic conversion. In the Orthodox world, is focused on, when they do a conversion, they want it to be done a certain way. So they have the specific guidelines for an Orthodox conversion, which I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not a rabbi. I don't know exactly what that's about. But if somebody wanted to join an Orthodox community, then they'd be expected to go through an Orthodox conversion. That's pretty much the gist of it. There are some groups that are more closed, and it's not anti-convert, it's just anti-anybody who's not the same. Sometimes they can feel threatened, but there are many Hasidic groups that are open. Where I grew up in Toronto, I mean, we had like black Jews come in and Baba Shul, and we had like people with ponytails, and we had a very colorful group of people in our shul. And I didn't remember this as a kid growing up because I wasn't around then, but my father told me there were like some rabbis at the synagogue who walked into Baba with like a tank top and a ponytail, and now they have long payas and beards, and you'd never know from looking at the way they dress. But the general idea that the Baal Shem Tov had in mind, the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement in the 1700s, the idea that he had in mind was that everybody should be allowed in, everybody should be connected, because he believed, and this is probably the central facet of Hasidic thought, is that every single human being has a reason they are in this world. Every single human being, it was created for a special reason, and we have to try to find that spark, find that reason for that person to feel alive and to be alive, and empower people to do the best they can with what they have. And the Hasidic movement was founded on the idea that every single Jewish person should be connected to God, regardless of their standing, where they come from, where they're going. So it's possible that this idea has gotten diluted over time, also because of traumas that can make people suspect and be wary of people who are not exactly like themselves. But the idea of Hasidism is everybody's welcome.
So I want to just say a couple of things and then a thank you. And first of all, I want to say thank you. We're going to finish up with one question at the end, but I want to say thank you for joining us. And can you remind me of, I don't remember the next time we're coming together. Do you remember the date of that, Shloime?
I believe it's, can I check my email for a second?
Absolutely. And why? Right?
I know the third one is supposed to be on April 13th.
Right.
Where's Diane?
I should know this too, but Diane's, all right, we'll come back to that, but I can tell you that we have on March, I just want to make sure that everyone knows, on March 9th we have Henry Abramson joining us again to talk about Jewish history. And I'm going, as you're answering the last question, I'm going to double check the time the date that you're coming next to talk about.
March 30th.
March 30th is
March
next.
30th, thank you. So March 9th, we have Henry Abramson. Great. March 9th, we have Henry Abramson. You're coming to join us again on March 30th talking about your travels around the world. I do want to disagree with you on one thing that you said today. I apologize, but you said that you're not a deep thinker. I completely disagree. I think that you are a deep thinker.
Oh, thank you.
I think you might be a different thinker than some of your friends in your community, but it doesn't mean you're not a deep thinker. So thank you. Thank you for giving us an insight in a way that we really could not have had an insight from almost anyone else in the Hasidic community, from our Hasidic part of our family. And so we want to thank you. And some of what you said may have been different from what we expected, different from the way we live our lives, different from our Judaism and our side of the family, but that's okay. And I think that that you think deeply about your community, and we deeply appreciate that. So thank you very much. But I can ask, by the way, not only do I like for everyone to keep their camera on, but if you can always make sure to keep yourself on mute, that's good. Well, before we start, while we're still talking. So my final question is, if you could just tell us, there's a question about your family, and if everyone in your family is still part of the Hasidic world, and considering the fact that you've had a bit of a rocky road through the world of Hasidic education, and you live a little bit of a different Hasidic life than other Hasidim, why do you stick with it? That's my question.
So that is, again, we can have another session about that completely. And by the way, this, I hope and pray that this will be the beginning of a beautiful relationship between myself and your community, because I'm looking forward to every session that we're going to be doing virtually. I hope one day we'll be able to sit together in person, and, you know, after all this craziness is over, and there's so much to talk about and so much to learn about each other. But that specific question, why do I stick with it? Because this is all I know. Well, I shouldn't say that. I it's not, at this point in my life, I've traveled enough. It's not all I know, but this is what I love. I struggled with this for a long time. There were times that I hated myself. There were times that I hated my community, and through my journey, I've come to understand this is a very special community. Yes, it has its challenges. It has some negative sides to it, but there's a lot of beautiful things going on here. And you know what? Through my work, where I bring people in to this gated, insular community, I've come to appreciate my community more and more. I took this non-Jewish guy, Peter Santinello, came into the community. He couldn't believe that somebody was giving him access. And to be honest, most of my Hasidic friends couldn't believe what I was doing either. We let him in. He saw some of the most intimate things. He was at a Shabbos table. He came with his camera and filmed the Hasidic Shabbos table. We did 15 episodes together. We got a combined 40 million views on YouTube and Facebook together. And you should see the outpouring of love. Like, I was expecting, YouTube comment section is a nasty place. And the outpouring of love we got from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, and from people in the United States, and from the Christian world, from the Muslim world, the Hasidic community, and I believe all communities, but the Hasidic community has a lot of beautiful things to share. There's a lot of kindness going on. There's a lot of beautiful stories and beautiful concepts of love and acceptance, that even though the Hasidic world struggles with loving and accepting everyone from the outside world, but the tenets of Hasidic Judaism is based on that. And at the end of the day, with all of our traumas and things that we've picked up in the Holocaust, I believe that it's a very good, beautiful, kind, caring, compassionate community. And this is where I am. This is what I am. You can take the Hasid out of Brooklyn, but you can't take Brooklyn out of the Hasid. No matter where I am in the world, I try to take the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and the great rabbis and the great people with me. And why do I stick with it? Because I love it. And this is not somebody who's been this way all my life. I've struggled with this, but I've come full circle, and now I know why I'm in the community. It's possible you can pick someone out of the community and ask them why they're there, and they might have no idea because they never went on that journey of self-discovery. They never took the leap of faith to leave the community and take a look around and see what else is doing in the world and then come back. I did that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We look forward to continuing to learn with you in the next session about your travels and in the final session about the politics of the Hasidic community.
Okay, thank you so much. And I hope it won't be the final session.
Absolutely not. Great.